You are listening to Beyond the Measure, episode 41. Listen as I, a young composer, and my wife, a young choir director, interview other music educators in order to gain insight into their own success in the classroom. We have a lot to learn, and we want you to learn with us. No matter your age, ensemble, or experience, this is the ideal podcast for music educators, composers, and students alike. So join us as we go beyond the measure. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode. My name is Christian.
And my name's Kara.
And this is Beyond the Measure, a podcast for music educators. If you are listening and you're a music teacher, whether it's choir, band, orchestra, private lessons, whatever, if that's you, then this is the show for you, because all we do here is we just interview as many different music teachers as we can to learn all sorts of tips and tricks and insight and wisdom from people all across the aisle when it comes to teaching music. Today's guest is Mr. Jay Lester, and he spent many years as an administrator for a public school district right here in Abilene, Texas. So he brings a lot of great insight from the administrator's perspective. He was the fine arts director for Abilene ISD, and so he goes into a lot of detail about what kind of skills are needed if you're wanting to go into administration and kind of what that perspective looks like. And this is actually going to be a two-part episode because he's actually now the director of the world-famous Cowboy band at Hardin-Simmons University. And so this first part of the interview is going to focus much more on the admin side of things, him talking about that. He also goes into a lot of detail about what he as an administrator would be looking for when hiring music teachers for all the different schools. And so if you are looking to apply for some new positions here in the near future, then this is a great episode to listen to hear from an administrator's perspective what they are looking for when conducting interviews and looking at resumes and all those sorts of things.
Yeah, so without further ado, this is our interview with Jay Lester.
Jay, thank you so much for being on the podcast with us today.
Well, this is exciting.
For our listeners that don't really know who you are, tell us who you are, what you do right now, and kind of what you've been doing over the past year, because we know you've had kind of a transition in your in what you're doing in the music world, and just kind of how you came to do music and how you got to where you are now. And you can be as specific with that as you want, or as general as you want.
Well, you can. A lot of people talk about this, but I still don't know what I want to do when I grow up. I was talking to our CFO at Hardin-Simmons, and he said he didn't know what he wanted to do when he grew up. And I said, I'm in the same boat. So I've done a lot of different things over my life, and started off going to college and interested in music. So played in the band, sang in the choir, played in the orchestra, jazz band, did all those types of things, and got near the end of college and realized I have to actually get a job. So went into music education and started teaching band and orchestra, and then went back to school again for another master's degree in educational administration at North Texas, and then decided to try to land a fine arts director job. And I was pretty young at the time, didn't have any business applying, but I did, and I actually got one after a pretty good interview series. And 17 years later, here I am at Hardin-Simmons, having recently retired from Abilene ISD. And I serve as a music education, trumpet, and band director.
And leading into that, to give a little bit more context of how we know you, Jay, Kara, do you want to explain to our listeners how we know Jay originally?
Well, Jay was my boss. So yes, I worked with him a little bit, and he helped, my choirs and everything like that. But that's how I knew him first, and then he went on to Hardin-Simmons.
That's right. It's kind of funny. We joke. He just got passed off, I guess, because y'all were working together for AISD, and now me and Jay are working together at Hardin-Simmons, and here you are, a part of the Cowboy band program now.
That's true. Although I don't like using the term boss. In fact, yesterday I was even saying that to my wife, that I don't miss that. Yeah. I considered us working as collaborators rather than, a hierarchy, but enjoyed my time, we'll talk a little bit about fine arts and
Yeah.
and that kind of work. It's different, but it's very fulfilling.
So what does, because I mean, for me, I'm not a music teacher. I've not worked in public education at all, and so I really don't know what being a fine arts director even looks like from day to day, aside from you are the boss, right? So for, I mean, and I'm sure a lot of people listening might know a lot more than me, but I'm just curious, what does that kind of position look like on a day-to-day basis, would you say?
So most of the time, you're going to find that position being at a larger school district that has either a really large high school or multiple high schools in the same district. And it's an administrative level position where they're supervising, setting curriculum, hiring, and unfortunately sometimes firing, and then working on professional development to present to teachers, maintaining and purchasing things, inventory, management. So there's lots of aspects of the job. Then there's all the other duties as assigned, right. Which encompasses just about anything you can think of. If you have a specialty area, or if you've become good at something, then they'll definitely exploit that. Right. I was in on a lot of construction projects. Over time, I think I did 25 different construction projects in the 17 years I was in this. So got pretty good at that, at wearing a hard hat and reading blueprints and working on design. And I enjoyed that. That was fascinating. I get to be a pretend architect.
Yeah. So in those 17 years, I do have to ask, I know, teachers on their own have a bunch of, crazy stories just from within their classroom. But for you that has a much wider view of everything as far as the district goes, what's the craziest or out of the blue story that you have just from being an administrator? Anything weird that
well, there's a lot of, you'll notice that a lot of administrators are tight-lipped. And that's by design. Right. Keeps you out of trouble. Don't put anything in print. Yeah. There's a school of administrative ease that you have to learn. We had an accordion donated at one time, and I didn't know how to say no to that.
It's like, thanks.
One time I had somebody that convinced me they could sing the school song for one of our high schools in front of 15,000 people at a big event, and it did not go as well as I had hoped. So, I can't say that I was perfect in what I did, but I definitely was optimistic.
Yeah. Is there a recording of that anywhere?
I hope not.
Link below. No, I'm just kidding.
I think I did run across the CD of that when I was moving out.
That's great. Well, we've unfortunately had a lot of not very good performances of anthems lately. We just had who sang the national anthem the other day.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, and she blamed that on being drunk. But I think I said that night that I don't think alcohol affects pitch.
That's good. That's well said. Well, very cool. I just had to ask that. I don't know, that it's like, for me, again, as someone that's not a teacher, I can easily ask about what's all the crazy stuff you see, and it's just entertainment for me. But I know that is all hard stuff that y'all have to do, and it's those are hard jobs, fine arts and teaching and all those things. And that's why we're here, is to try to get our listeners a little bit more knowledge and information that's going to help them.
Well, a lot of that, just going into administration, it's just on another level. So you're working, instead of supervising children, you're supervising teachers, which one step above student. So it's just different. They're adults and they're on your level. So it's a collaboration. You've got to set short-term, mid-term, long-term goals. You have to get systems in place. And some people are really good at that, and some, that's not their strength. So surround yourself with people that have different strengths than you do. I'd like to think I left it in a pretty good place where we had some systems established. When I talked to Clay Johnson, he's the one that kind of took over in Abilene, and he said, yeah, things are well established, and I don't have to worry about things because there's procedures in place.
And I'm curious, whenever you talk about setting goals and those kinds of procedures and things. And I know that probably varies depending on the type of area you're looking at, whether it's music or art or theater. But what are some examples of, like, when you say goals, are you mainly talking about like number goals, like growth, or quality goals? Or, I mean, I'm sure it goes across the board, but
all of the above.
Yeah.
So you can't grow annually in all areas. And one thing that you have to really watch out for is that if one middle school program is growing, that could mean that others are declining. So my goal was to keep them all well balanced with the right number. And what's the right number? Teaching the right number of students so that you're not overwhelmed or overworked, that you have enough resources and your capacity isn't burdened. So if all of a sudden Kara's choir swelled to 250 students and the band numbers decreased to 80 students, we'd have a major problem. We'd have a staffing issue. We'd have a site issue where there's not room in the facility. So when I talk about numbers and balance, that's the kind of goal, is to make sure that everything's in check. We're not trying to hold people back, but we're also trying to make sure that we have the right facilities and resources for everything.
Yeah, you don't want it to be too strenuous. And kind of zooming out a bit, I mean, what do you feel like as an administrator were some of the biggest challenges you faced in that kind of position? I mean, was that do you feel like there was more internal challenges of how to like straighten things out in certain ways? Or do you think it was more of an external challenge of dealing things with like how the world is changing or how people are viewing the fine arts? Or, I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, that's a good topic you just brought up, because I can remember probably 10 years ago, there was a headline that was picked up in our local newspaper that said, "Fine arts budgets cut."
Oh boy.
And if you read past the title, you would have seen that the article was picked up on the AP Newswire from another part of the country. So it was maybe New York State or California or something. But I had a lot of people across the town say, "Oh, that's just so terrible. I hate to hear that," because they don't read past titles often, or they don't read full context. So we were very blessed. We are very blessed here in Abilene. The arts are valued, and I can only think of a couple of times where we had any kind of a decrease in budget, and it was minor. And even any time it was decreased, I knew that there was going to be support in the future when funding returned, and it always came back. I didn't feel like we were wanting. You put people on a schedule and a timeline. Sometimes the answer is no, and sometimes the answer is yes, but not at this time. Maybe next year you're going to get a new set of risers or a piano or something. So we do look out and we balance that.
And I also have to ask this, because this is, I mean, you have a very unique perspective compared to a lot of guests we've had on the show so far, having been in an administrative role like that. I know, like, for me and for a lot of people, wherever they work, there are times where, like, you as the person who's, doing the thing, and you have a bunch of people over you, a bunch of admin, there can be times where, from that perspective, it's like you almost feel like there's a disconnect there at times, like, why is admin doing this? It doesn't make any sense, or blah, blah, blah. So, like, if there's one thing that you feel like that you wish, if there's one thing you wish teachers could really understand about what it's like from an administrative perspective, that may be harder to understand when you're actually in the classroom, I mean, what do you think that would be?
Well, probably that, and I hope I did this. Kara can tell you after I turn the microphone off. I tried to be informative and just tell people straight up what's happening when I could. That's not always possible. Sometimes you have to keep quiet about things, but
right.
Or delayed response. But, we are on the same team. And a lot of times I'd say use common sense, but if you're going to make a major decision that changes curriculum or burdens resources or something, that you probably need to run it by me first.
Communicate.
Exactly. But I made 2 campus visits a day, unless something was really strange, minimum, just to try to get on campuses and see what's happening. And then sometimes you learn a lot just by standing outside somebody's door.
Yeah. Is that a typical administrative thing? Do they go around like listening in through the doors?
No,
Listening.
no, not usually.
Okay.
I did that, and then sometimes you make an entrance, but usually you get a performance when you have an entrance,
Yeah. Yeah.
either by the students or the teacher.
Yeah. Good point. Good point. Okay. Would you like a way to create a special moment, a unique memory that only you and your students can share? Is there a certain audience you will be performing for and you want just the right type of music for the occasion? Or perhaps you're just in need of a piece that has a specific voicing, range, or theme that you haven't been able to find anywhere else. I mean, last time I checked, publishers weren't scrambling to create music for a bassoon, alto voice, and accordion trio, but maybe that's what you're looking for. No matter the reason or the instrumentation, I would love to fulfill your music needs in the form of a commission. If you're unfamiliar with what commissioning me would look like, or even any composer for that matter, you can learn more about the process at christianfortnermusic.com/commission. This includes info such as the step-by-step timeline, payment options, and more. I want to work with you so that we can create a memorable experience for everyone involved, including you, myself, the performers, and the listeners that will hear the music for years to come. Because remember, you never know whose lives will be changed for the better because of the music that came into existence because of you. So are you ready to make a new memory through new music? I am. Take the first step by filling out a commission request form at christianfortnermusic.com/commission. Hope to hear from you soon.
So if any of the listeners are interested or wanting to be in an administrative role like a director of fine arts, what would you tell them, like tips and tricks or advice that you
Don't
would
do
give
it.
them? Don't
No,
do
I'm
it.
kidding.
Just destroyed the whole market.
No, it's really fulfilling work. But that's a great question. So getting into it, first off is you've got to work as a director somewhere and get an idea what it's like to supervise children, also maybe a booster club or high school, sometimes middle school, but just be in charge of a lot of that and have a lot of success. So where they're looking for somebody who's already managed budgets on their level, plan trips, understand UIL rules about eligibility, understand TMEA rules. Also, after you get into the role, you might, if you're not familiar with art and theater, you have to learn about that. So it's a lot about learning, different organizations. So you don't have to know about them all right away. Right. It's okay to admit what you don't know, but you got to get after it and start studying. Being somebody I went back to school, did administration, another degree, that is so helpful. And now it's almost required in the larger districts. It's not always the case, but it certainly helps. And it brings perspective to what they're thinking and why and how things are done. So it's like another line of coursework and then another test that you have to take to be certified.
And that kind of answers a question I was going to have was, I'm sure it's possible, but is it preferable for a teacher, like, let's say you have, like Kara is a choir director and she decides I want to be an administrator. Is it that simple or I guess that attainable to just go from being a teacher to an administrator? Or do you think it really is best to find some other sort of experiences that can kind of lead into that kind of position? Like the graduate degree, like you mentioned, would seem like a good example of that.
And some districts make you go back after the fact. Others don't care at all. Most of the time, there's a master's degree or admin that's preferred. And so that's the way they write it, is not required but preferred. And, you mentioned what kind of experiences. Well, rich experiences are what matter. I would say most of the people that get into this have taught for at least 15 to 20 years. And they've had experiences with a state and national scene. So maybe they've presented at conferences. I made sure that I had that experience, having presented at Texas Music Educators Conference, the Midwest Clinic, Texas Bandmasters, and then later presented at Texas Choral Directors, Texas Orchestra Directors, Texas Music Administrators Conference. So you just get around. And then you want to be able to say that you had success with things like UIL or other festivals, or that your group has performed at certain parades on a national level or at a convention.
I was about to say that it seems like the kind of thing where when you're in administration, you are automatically in a position where you have a wider view of everything that's going on across the board in the district. Therefore, you definitely want to get as many experiences that widen your perspective as well, like going to those conferences, going to all the region meetings, participating in more of those behind the scenes kind of things.
Someone asked me a long time ago, what does it take to get into it? You got to find somebody that knows excellence, knows how to recognize it, knows how to get teachers to get to that point. Because even though Kara, for instance, maybe she didn't teach band, but she's going to find the resources, the people, the standards that you want to set, and the goals to get a young band director where they need to be. So when I came here, and things ebb and flow, but some of our orchestra programs weren't doing very well, and immediately set some goals there. Some of our choir programs had been struggling at times, so the key is to get the right person in the right place and give them the resources they need so they can have success at things like UIL and all region. So those are what we strive to do.
Yeah, getting all the building blocks and putting them all together.
When I went into the job, this is an aspect you might want to include.
Okay.
I honestly went in thinking, oh, this is great. I won't have to go to football games anymore. Or I won't have to go to as many night events or concerts. It was just the opposite. Now, your role changes. You don't always have to be in charge. But you're there in a supportive role, and so you can get there, slightly before it starts. When it's over, you're out the door, and you're not waiting for the last student to be picked up. But that is definitely something that comes about that most people don't understand. They underestimate that. So you're there, the time commitment, and it's seasonal. So I always love September because there's nobody performing in September.
Right.
And then October hits and you've got all the fall concerts, and then November hits and it's conferences and state marching, and there's all kinds of conferences in November for administrators. And then you get to December, and oh my goodness,
it's the worst.
It's the worst.
The holidays.
December and May, those are the concert season and programs. But it's all good. You have to just have a spouse that's willing to work with you, and that's, like I said, it's seasonal.
So how do you balance that whenever in the busy seasons? How do you balance your work and life?
That's a great topic. So what I would do, and this maybe not the best thing, I would make it a point to go home about an hour early so I could get my mind right, have dinner with family, and then I'd have to bolt and go off for the evening. So that way, at least your family sees you for part of the day on those kind of days.
It's a weird position in that your quote unquote break is the first month of school. And then
that's really, so when school started, it was when I could breathe a sigh of relief, because we had just come off of the region meeting. We just came off of doing professional development for several days, doing new teacher orientation. So it's really crunch time at the beginning. And then you ask for all this information back, like, what do you need? And then you start working on that.
So what would you say, someone that might be listening to this who is in, whether it's a teaching position or some sort of area in the music world, or maybe not even in music, but just in education, that maybe in the back of their mind they've considered possibly looking into administrative role. I mean, what is the kind of person that you feel like would really fit that kind of role that, if they were thinking, I don't know if this is right for me, could you glean a little bit more on what kind of a person you need to be so that someone listening to this might kind of hear that and say, oh, that kind of sounds like me. Like maybe this is actually something I should look more seriously into.
So it's a unique skill set. You have to have somebody who's not willing, that is very willing to get up in front of a group of people and talk. That horrifies some people. Some people are great teachers and they can talk in front of kids all day and students, but you put them in front of an adult and they do not like being judged in front of their peers. I learned that a few years ago. We had a professional development where I made where I asked certain people to present on instruments or voice or something, and oh my goodness, they were some of them were quite nervous about it. So you learn that. So you got to be that kind of person. You got to be somebody who likes data and can, work with data for improvement and to help support your requests. If you're asking for more money for certain things, you've got to show, well, the inventory's this old. This is an average age. This is what it should be. So there's a lot of this behind the scenes data. Same with numbers. If you're asking for additional staff, you've got to show these are the numbers over the past 10 years. This is traditionally where we add some extra help.
I think I understand what you meant by a unique skill set, because I could be wrong, but from a lot of the things you're talking about, it's a lot of the aspects of teaching that teachers don't like, like all the numbers and
it's all the administrative
all the spreadsheet stuff.
But there's also the ability to inspire, to lead, to teach. So that's different from the accountant side.
Influence.
Yeah, you have to be an influencer, and you have to be a great communicator. You've got to be able to sit down at a meeting and communicate effectively and share your point of view. And you got to learn when not to share and when to push, when to back off. Sometimes it's not appropriate.
Being able to read the room.
Read the room. That's a great thing.
Don't just read music. Read the room.
That's completely different from music. So
yeah.
One thing I you asked about balancing life balance, and I just thought of this, and you got to have an outlet. If you get into this type of work and you don't keep singing in a church choir or community choir or play an instrument or do art or be in a play or something, then you're going to burn out because you forget why you went into it. And so I would choose, like for a while I was conducting a lot. Had a community band that also combined with a college down in Victoria. So I was doing a lot of conducting every week. And then moved here. They've already got a community band. So thought, well, I'll start playing a little bit more because I used to do a lot of symphony playing, and I took about a 10-year break from it. So I went back to it, decided I'm going to start practicing more. I'll get into that again. And so that's kind of my outlet, been doing that. And then lately been back into conducting a little bit more. But you have to have something or else you'll forget why you're in it, because you can't just do the administrative side. If you can't relate experience, it's all about the experiences with people. So let's talk a little bit about, this is a topic that I find interesting for young people. One of our universities started doing this about 10 or 12 years ago. They had every student, when they were doing their student teaching or clinical teaching, they would have to meet with an administrator, and most of the music people would meet with me. Some of them would choose to meet with a principal, but not very many. And we talk about things like their resume and cover letter, and we review those and see what are we looking for and what are we not looking for. And then we talk about how to prepare for an interview and the kind of things that, how do you prepare? What do you prepare? And then how to answer questions effectively, how to communicate. And then we talk about just research, learning about the school. But I'll kind of go through this a little bit more in detail right now. So the resume, let's start with that. Resume needs to be, number one, honest. It doesn't need to be exaggerated.
Right.
Because the person reading the resume is going to read right through any kind of exaggeration. When you've heard people funny that say things like, I'm a domestic engineer. Well, that means stay-at-home mom. So, or they're a custodian and they make something up. Or I'm a technician, and I'm like, just put down that you worked at a church as a youth director, or whatever. Any kind of experiences they can add. When you're young, your resume looks different than when you got young teacher, middle, and then more experienced. So when you're young, you need to put, I don't necessarily need to see every time you worked at Taco Bell or something like that, but it would be good to show that you worked with children somewhere. Maybe it was at a church or a camp youth camp, and if it's even in the field, like you're doing music and you taught some musical lessons private lessons to students, that would be the appropriate thing to list. And if you had a supervisory job or something say you worked at Subway and you were the night manager or something, that would be the perfect thing to put on there, because it shows that you can deal with money and people and supervise. Then, the cover letter needs to be honest. You need to make sure that you're not using some kind of formatting software that leaves the last school's name on it.
Oh, yeah.
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 I'm so glad to be working in the wrong school or applying to your school and they put the wrong one. Make sure you're looking at that. And then references. References are very important. It's important to pick between 3 and 5. You talk to the person that you're going to be referencing first, and you tell them what you're doing and ask them if they will be a good reference for you. Make sure you list their cell number and their email that they're going to check. Used to, we'd put full address and everything, but nowadays it's just cell phone and email. If you put an office phone and a school email that they don't check, professors and principals are the worst as far as getting back with people in the summer. So put down people that will respond and that will say something good about and that know something about you. So they've experienced having you in the class or at church or something. And I usually tell people, don't put your pastor. No pastor ever said anything about anybody ever.
Right.
So I would not put that
Fair.
unless you worked at that church and they were your direct supervisor. That's when it is appropriate. Then you just want to make sure that the resume is between 1 to 1.5 pages when you're young. Doesn't necessarily have to just be 1 page. I know some people say that, but especially in music, art, theater, you're going to have a little bit more on there. Now, when you get a little bit older, you don't want to list every single rating or piece that you've performed with your choir, your band, your orchestra. That's not important either. We can look that up. We will look it up. We don't need to see it. But you might put that you were the middle school choir representative for the region. You took on some responsibility. That would be a great thing to add. Any kind of work that you did with TMEA or UIL that's extra, or even within your own district. Like I was the lead teacher, I took this on, or I hosted this event. That would be great. That shows strength and experience.
What would you say about when it comes to degrees? How big of a role does, say, like having a master's degree in music make, do you feel like, when it comes to the hiring process or when you're looking for a candidate? Or maybe a better way to put it is like, do you think it'd be better to have 5 years of teaching experience with no master's degree, or like 2 years of teaching experience with? Does that even play a big role there?
Not really. Degrees help, but we never look at transcripts unless something's really odd. And really, I can't say this enough, but we're going to look at the candidate. Can they communicate effectively? What's their past history? Do they show experience that they've had a good job and been a good leader? And sometimes they're just in the wrong place.
Right.
So, and you as an administrator, you learn to recognize that. Like, that's a hard place to go, and you made a difference. Maybe this is a better place for you.
That actually brings up another point. I was going to say, this is something I've learned, even working at Hardin-Simmons, I work on a team, and, every now and then if we hire somebody new, we'll interview somebody. There's multiple interviews they'll do, but at one point they'll interview with the whole team. And we're just there to get a feel for, even if they're completely qualified to do this job, are they going to fit well on this team? And I feel like that's something that's not said enough, that, if you're not hired for a certain position, that may not necessarily mean that you're not qualified or have enough experience to do that. It might just be you are not a right fit for what the district or whatever organization is needing right in that moment, in that context.
Absolutely. Yeah, and sometimes age and experience has a lot to do with it. If you're trying to hire a head choir director at a high school, more than likely you're going to have on the job application, it'll say 3 to 5 years, required. Right. And then there'll be a preferred. And maybe the degree thing might be listed as preferred, but not required. Mm-hmm. So it just depends. So then when we meet with these students, or when I meet and try to coach people on interviewing skills, I'll tell them, study the school, study the program, learn everything from what discipline plan is being used to what's their mascot, how were their ratings in the past. I think one of the worst things you can do, and I've had this happen, so usually if I bring it up, that means it's happened before. I had people walk in and say, and I'll ask them, well, tell me, why do you want to be at, such and such high school or middle school? And they'll say, I don't know. I don't know anything about the school at all. I don't even know where I am. Right. I'm not sure how I got here. Google Maps brought me here. and I think that's the last person I want teaching here right now. I want people who want to be here and make a difference in students' lives. So that's important. The other thing that you have to be pretty good at, make sure you've got your elevator speech prepared. Now, living in West Texas, we can probably count on one hand the number of elevators in our city. Right. That whole term, elevator speech, that's kind of from New York City, where you're going to be in an elevator maybe 40 to 60 stories, and you've got about 2 or 3 minutes to tell somebody about yourself. So practice it. Tell them your story, where you went to school, what you did. And that's really the time that you can share your passions and maybe things that we can't ask you. So we can't ask you if you're married, and you don't have to tell your committee, but it helps bring in a human element to the candidate. I have 2 dogs. Well, I can't ask them if they have dogs.
Yeah.
Or I've got a child at home. I can't ask that question. Right. So there's certain rules about interviewing, but during that time when we ask them if there's anything you'd like to share about yourself, if they volunteer it, then that helps.
I think that's strikingly, funny enough, very similar to what we hear a lot of teachers say about how someone should be with their students as well. Even though the context might look a lot different, at the end of the day, you want to be genuine about who you are to your students so that they are more likely to trust you. From what I'm hearing, it sounds like the same goes for an administrative perspective. When you're looking for candidates for positions, you want to find people that are going to be who they are and be honest about, who they are and their background. And obviously there's a lot of other factors that go into the hiring process, but that is a very crucial part to have included in that.
Yeah, absolutely. Then there's some other things that that you would need to prepare. And, there's certain questions you're going to see on all interviews. And one of them deals with classroom management or discipline. And they'll say, tell me your approach and your plan. You better have something that you've kind of thought through so that you can tell me that. And if they get up and say, well, I write their name on the board, and then I put a check next to it, and then I put another check, and usually those kind of plans don't work. So you have to be a little bit more proactive. That's what we're looking for. Then you'll see questions that deal with your pedagogy of your instrument or your voice, or whether you're in theater. And you better have some ideas and done your homework about Kodai, or if you're doing elementary music, or if you're teaching instruments, you better know about violin, viola, bass, cello, and the differences in the bow hold, hand position, when to introduce vibrato, when to introduce the bow, different bow styles. So all those things are something we're looking for the candidate to already know. Sometimes they have to learn, or they better tell me where the resource can be found. Like I'm going to teach woodwinds. I'm a brass person. I don't know everything about them, but I have these resources that I keep in my back pocket.
Going back to what you just said a minute ago, even if you don't have experience with a certain kind of instrument or section, it's better to say, I don't have a lot of experience, but I'm more than willing to learn more, and I have these resources ready, than, I can do it. Don't worry about it.
You touched on something important. If they have too much confidence and we can tell they don't know what they're doing, it's going to shine through. So there's a difference between being an extrovert, being honest. You can be confident and honest and say, I don't know, but I'm going to look it up, and I'm going to call my friends who know and my mentors.
Now, you mentioned something really briefly earlier about when you're looking and asking prospective hire questions. You mentioned ratings, and I wanted to bring this up because there's lots of discussion. I mean, as we all know, about the pros and cons of UIL and ratings, and does it accurately show the whole picture about how a group has done or how a teacher has done? How do you approach when you're looking at ratings from an administrative perspective? How much weight does that really carry, and is it really just a surface level thing that you're just looking at it and that's kind of it, or you really want to know more about the background of those?
Typically, if I want to know how they performed in the past 2 or 3 jobs, I'll just check some references. But it's called a pattern, and if their pattern is not successful from one job to the next, then we're probably not going to look at them. But if they went to a place and they took that school that was making Division III ratings all the way to 2s, and they showed some improvement, or if you go somewhere and made 1s for 5 years and then dipped down, made a 2, then went back to 1s, the ratings are just a snapshot, but they do show overall what the group's doing throughout the year.
Yeah, over time, especially
over time.
It's consistent.
Yeah, if you're consistently not doing very well, then you've probably got some problems, some issues. But if you're consistently doing well, then that's good, or showing improvement. So the answer is multifaceted. It's very important still. People that usually say, well, I just don't like the UIL system. Typically, they're the ones that don't perform very well.
Ooh.
That's a truth.
Sure.
And I don't like that excuse, or when they come up and argue and say it's just not right, and these kids have made a lot of progress. That's not. But one thing that you got to learn is it's not one you win, everything else you lose. It's based on progress, and it's an assessment, just like taking a test.
Yeah. It's about the direction you are going.
One of my teachers from many years ago said, if you do what you're supposed to do every day with excellence, you don't need to worry about the ratings. They're going to take care of themselves.
Yep.
And, they always did. So every once in a while, some anomaly happens where I can remember one year I had a really incredible wind ensemble, and we drew the very first slot of the day, and we were performing at 7:45. I had to get them up at school at like 5 a.m. Everybody's wired on donuts, and and they're just bouncing off the walls. They get on the bus, then they crash, and then we get there, and they just didn't perform as well as I knew they could. And they ended up with a 1-2-2 on stage, and it just killed me because I'd never had that. And then they went to a festival like 2 weeks later and won the whole thing.
It really sometimes just depends on the day.
It depends,
right?
And I'm not going to go in and say, well, this is the excuse because we were early. Well, someone has to be early.
Sure.
It's just live and learn. If we do this again, I'll know how I approach that. But it's much easier to go in the afternoon.
Yeah, that's true. You're not wrong. Yeah.
When you have to get them up in the middle of the night, drive, it can be challenging.
Definitely.
But it's not the end of the world, and they didn't have, their value wasn't connected solely to the ratings.
Yeah.
And I didn't get up and say they were, judges were wrong. I didn't try to make excuses. I just said, y'all didn't perform as well as you could have. And they all agreed, and we set some new goals, and we went out and we won that festival. So that kind of capped the year off.
That's a great perspective. That's something I think that we need to include, that because that conversation can be pretty one-sided, I feel like, at times. And so I think that's great to have that. So cool. Anything else that you want to share regarding anyone looking to, applying to a district, whether it's their first time or not?
Yeah. Well, on a closing note, usually it's good to go in with a notepad with some questions that you've written down, you as the interviewee, that you might want answered. And 9 times out of 10, as you look at them, they get answered during the interview.
Right.
And at the very end, they might ask you, what kind of questions do you have for us? That's when you can ask some questions. But you shouldn't ask things like, hey, what time do I have to be here in the morning? What time can I go home at night?
What time's lunch?
What time? How long do I get off for lunch? You can ask them in a way that, what does the schedule look like?
Right.
for the normal, what does the day look like for the band director, for the choir director? And then they will tell you what they know. And then you can ask, does this job come with a stipend? Or I really like going to the TMEA convention. I'm hoping that there's some funding and I can get off for that. Do you know in the past what y'all have done? That way they can tell you, and you're kind of leading the witness.
Yeah.
But you're not demanding, because you want to set the tone. It's all about being a good communicator. And number one, you can have two candidates. One of them could be I don't encourage this, but could be a straight C student, another could be a straight A student. And the difference will be the way they interview and communicate.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Beyond the Measure, a podcast for music educators. We hope you learned something that will help you stress less about how to teach so that you can focus more on who you're teaching. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave us a rating and review, subscribe, and share this podcast with other music educators. See you in the next one.